last Saturday, the US and Iran held tense, highly anticipated negotiations in Oman over Iran's rapidly accelerating nuclear program. And this was actually the first time that the two countries met and discussed this since Trump pulled the US out of the Obama-era nuclear deal in 2018.
And from reporting, we've learned that both parties sat in separate rooms and communicated through an Omani mediator. But at the end, U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi walked out together, so they briefly spoke face to face.
And the stakes for this meeting could not be higher because Iran was actually hit with Trump's tariffs last week, and its economy has crumbled since Trump pulled us out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in his first term.
And that meant that the funds that had been opened to Iran through the JCPOA were refrozen, and their ability to sell crude oil was limited.
As for why these talks are so critical for the US, Iran's stockpile of uranium has enriched to 60%, which is allegedly a short technical step away from weapons grade levels, and it's just way more uranium than what Iran claims is for civilian purposes like energy and medicine.
No, it's definitely sus because they're the only non-nuclear weapon state enriching uranium to this level, and they have enough uranium to make 6 bombs.
Oh, great. And the reason the JCPOA was so important is because it limited how much uranium Iran could stockpile from like 60% and everything it has now to 3.67%. So even if Iran violated the deal and ended up making a nuclear weapon, it would take it a full year. The deal was initially signed by the UN Security Council, the EU, and the US in 2015.
But then Trump came into office and he called it the worst deal ever and said he'll get a better one that will stop Iran's missile development. But then he couldn't. So now Iran's steadily accelerating uranium enrichment, and some experts say they could build a nuke, quote, soon.
And now tensions are at a boiling point since Trump has threatened to unleash airstrikes on Iran's nuclear program if a deal isn't reached. And there's a looming deadline since part of the JCPOA, where the UN could impose sanctions on Iran, is set to expire on October 18th. So that could be one of the reasons that Trump is so set on having these talks.
But the JCPOA took 2 years to negotiate, so experts say it's likely Iran will drag the process out several years, which would give them more security and allow the deal to grow roots before someone else could come into office and undo it, like what happened last time. And this is interesting. Iran's currency has gained 16% just since the US talks were announced.
And these talks are more critical than ever because there's this fear that Iran could fund terrorist organizations in the region, which is, of course, a huge threat to Israel, a US ally. And these fears aren't baseless because Iran has said that it wants to outright destroy Israel. So Netanyahu is pushing to dismantle Iran's entire nuclear program. Quote, "We go in, blow up the facilities, and dismantle all the equipment under American supervision and execution."
Well, Iran has also been providing Russia ballistic missiles for the war in Ukraine. They're close allies. And actually, before the talks continue, Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi is visiting Russia to consult them on this deal.
So we're in the midst of these really fragile, pivotal negotiations right now. The next round is actually this Saturday, where Omani officials will actually continue to mediate.
So to get an insider perspective, we are thrilled to talk to Andrew Weber, who served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs under the Obama administration.
Can you set the scene for these talks last Saturday? Like, what atmosphere was the US kind of walking into to negotiate the terms of Iran's nuclear program?
Well, it was reportedly cordial. The talks were, of course, approved by President Trump and the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, in advance, arranged through an exchange of letters between the two of them. And it was, on the Iranian side, it was led by the foreign minister, who's a very skilled, capable diplomat. And on the U.S. side, it was a crony of President Trump's, Steve Witkoff, who is his special envoy for Middle East affairs.
For those who aren't following the negotiations that closely, what bargaining chips do both sides have right now? What demands do you expect they're both going to make in these negotiations?
Well, the situation has gotten much more dire since President Trump pulled out of the agreement in 2018. So that was nearly 7 years ago. Iran at the time only had low enriched uranium, which can't be used in a weapon. Since then, they've restricted the monitoring, and they've produced about 120 to 130 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which is not yet weapons grade, but it brings them much closer. On the other hand, Iran is in a position where it's very weak. It's suffered all but obliterated by the Israeli military after the Hamas attacks. Hamas has been pretty much destroyed, its leadership eliminated. Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy in Lebanon, its leadership has been destroyed and militarily weakened. And then, of course, Syria, the fall of the Assad regime, which was Iran's best neighbor, changes the situation very much. In addition, the economic sanctions over time have really, really hurt the Iranian economy. And they're suffering a lot. They're having power outages, shortage of gasoline. So they are very eager to have the sanctions lifted.
And why do you think Iran was finally open to having these talks after the US pulled out in 2018? We understand that like the relations have been pretty tense. What is different about the situation now?
For one, Iran is weaker militarily than it was a year ago. They had launched several attacks against Israel, and most of those missiles, cruise missiles, and drones were intercepted by an international force and never reached their targets in Israel. And of course, last year, Israel responded by taking out Iranian air defenses. So they're very vulnerable now. They had a sophisticated air defense system supplied by Russia, which has been completely destroyed. So they're very concerned that an emboldened Israeli leader, Netanyahu, who seems to get a green light for everything from President Trump these days, might attack their leadership targets and the Iranian nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo.
And we do understand also that a big part of the reason that these talks are so important now is because the UN's ability to impose sanctions on Iran is set to expire October 18th, which is obviously coming up. So what does that mean for Iran? What can we expect to see in the following months?
Well, that creates some real time pressure. The so-called snapback provision of the sanctions will expire this October. So, of course, Iran doesn't want that to happen. It's part of the reason they've entered into these negotiations, to show some good behavior. And also the political situation in Iran has changed. The former president died in a helicopter crash. He was fairly hardline. The new president is considered a pragmatist, and indeed he was able to convince the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who makes all of these decisions related to the nuclear program of Iran, that it was a good opportunity to negotiate at this time.
And we know, were a nuclear advisor under the Obama administration, which was the last time we had a nuclear deal with Iran. Just to remind everyone listening, how big of a feat was that? What can that tell us looking forward? Like, Trump says he's going to make this deal, but is it really going to be as easy as he's making it seem?
Oh, the original Iran nuclear agreement prevented Iran from having a nuclear weapon, period. It was a huge achievement. It was narrow and it's focused just on preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. And of course, President Trump pulled out of it in 2018, claiming that he was going to get a better deal, and he never did. And that's why the situation has gotten a lot worse in the intervening years.
You mentioned Steve Witkoff is, of course, the US representative who went to negotiate the deal on Saturday. To our knowledge, he doesn't really have the experience to facilitate the technical details of this nuclear program. Do you think he was the right person to head this? What can we expect with that?
Well, he's a total amateur at international diplomacy and doesn't have the technical expertise. My hope is that our experts from the State and Defense departments will support him in these negotiations. It's not clear to me. I was unable to determine exactly who accompanied him to the meetings last weekend in Muscat, Oman, but presumably he's not totally on his own, and he has professionals supporting him. He does have one real benefit as a negotiator, and that is he has the president's ear. And the Iranians know that.
And so we've been seeing reports, switching the subject a little bit to Israel, that Israel's preparing long-range missiles to launch attacks on Iran. Do you think they would do that while these negotiations are ongoing?
No, I definitely don't think that. Israel would much prefer that military strikes against the Iranian nuclear facilities be conducted together with the United States. And indeed, I think that's probably what would happen should these negotiations fail. Israel does have some unilateral capabilities, but for example, the United States has recently deployed some B-2 stealth bombers, strategic bombers, to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, which is in range of Iran. So I think because of the nature of the targets, they're deeply buried underground targets. The United States has much greater capabilities to destroy them than the Israeli military.
Does that give Iran incentive to drag the talks out then because they feel more secure?
I don't think Iran, if they're being wise, will drag out these talks. I think they should reach some kind of an agreement quickly that can diffuse the situation and allow Trump to rein in any potential Israeli unilateral military action.
So, what do you expect from these peace talks? Like, do you have faith that we will get to a deal soon? Like, we were kind of thinking back to Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office and how like heated discussions can be. Like, this is such a fragile situation. What do you think will come of it?
Well, we have professionals on both sides. The fact that these talks were approved at the highest levels of both governments, and they got off to a good start. They're meeting again this weekend, which, by the way, is the Iranian Supreme Leader's birthday. He's going to turn 86 years old. And
Oh my God.
yeah, so the fact that they're meeting again so quickly tells me that they probably won't have protracted, drawn out talks, that they can agree on the framework going forward.